Hi guys, welcome back to Brixie Studios Do-It-Yourself series. Today we're going to be working on a little bit of fundamental principles like centering and pulling, but first, if you don't mind, look down in there in the links below and give us a like, a subscribe, and if you don't mind, again, click on that notification bell. Those make a big difference for us and help us keep going. So back to the point at hand, we're going to talk a little bit more about centering and pulling today. We've used some larger masses of clay for this video so that you can see a little easier physically the demonstration of exactly what's about to happen. And pulling and centering, or centering and pulling, if you want to order it correctly, can really be discussed for just an enormous amount of time. In fact, can take the rest of your entire career. But what you want to focus on is that everyone's body is unique, and that is exactly what makes a unique forms for centering. And that is why it took me 4.5 years to figure out how to center the right way, because you have to adapt for your own unique purpose, your own unique hands, your own unique movements for your, from how your chest moves to how your back moves. It's going to make a huge difference, especially when you're moving large masses of clay like this. And for me in particular, like I said, it took a good while to learn how to get that under control. But one thing that you'll notice in my videos is that if I'm doing something that's about 1.5 pounds or smaller, I won't really cone up very much. It's usually just more of a flattening process. But when you have large masses of clay like this, you absolutely have to cone out so that you can try to collect the mass at the very, very bottom. And if you look, this is a great angle. Look where my hands were at there at the bottom when you see that shake occur at the touch of where the back comes into contact with the clay right there. And that is still continuing to shake me a little bit. Now, what I want you to see here is because one of the questions that were posed is, do you still have a little bit of square to this cylinder from the bag that you got it out of? I actually just pulled this out of a bag, cut it down, put it on the wheel. We didn't really spend any time with wedging, because that's probably going to reintroduce more air than it's worth. So what I'm trying to show here is that there's still corners from that large lump of clay. And it actually is still a little bit rectangular. The entire piece is still a little bit rectangular. And I'm trying to point out that if you have this occur, you'll still have, and I hate to say corners because that's a little bit of a misnomer, but you'll still have these sharp edges, if you will. And the way to get rid of them, and this is my right hand, is to take that bone in your wrist and to make a little groove. And you can see that little divot I made. That groove is what's going to help pull down the exterior of your cone and make a further centering occur on that mass. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to center the entire thing with that, right? It just means that you now have a little bit more of the mass centered. Quite a large mass. I think we're at between 15 and 18 pounds here. Since I didn't measure, we're not quite positive, but what I am trying to show again and again is that this is a repetitive process when you have larger pieces. You absolutely have to repeat that, rising up, coming back down. And it's essentially like what we would do if we were wedging, except this is just, a type of wedging on the wheel, if you will. Again, pushing that cone up, and it's not really, I'm not questioning how high it is. That's not my concern. The tall cone is not my concern. What my concern is the width at the base. And I want to absolutely make sure that that width at the base is small enough that it is contained, but, if you will, tighter than the original centered mass. In other words, if you plop that big base down and it took up a 12 inches, which, it came up really close to taking up 12 inches, you've got to have that come down tighter, something more like between 8 and 10 inches, so that you're really pulling from the middle of that piece and smashing it in so that you absolutely have it centered from centered inwards out into the piece, into the walls. It's going to take quite a bit of force, and even if you're not using force, there's some people that take finesse, and that's great. There is a level of finesse that you have to get this to rise up, but there is also a level of force that you have to have. There is no way around that. I don't want to lie and say this is just me in a ballet. That's not true. I am absolutely having to force this around a little bit. That's just the way it goes. So here we are back to opening, and I'm opening this time actually with my right hand, more specifically my right knuckle, and I'm just tilting my fist downward into this. It takes quite a considerable amount of force to push that much clay around. And if you'll notice, I actually opened quite thick. That piece right there is probably the better part of half a foot thick. And the reason for that is because it's a large vessel. You have to open with a lot of power on a large vessel like that, and because I want it taller, it is going to be stacked higher to begin with. That is important. You don't want to have a really super flat disc and think that you're going to get a really tall vessel. It's just not something that's going to happen. Alright, so that little bit right there was just me being retentive, and I wanted to make sure that the centered part, in other words, the very, very, very middle base of my foot, was a little over a half an inch thick. I need that for the solidarity of the piece itself, or if I'm going to trim into it, you need something to be able to trim into. In this case, I'm not going to trim it. A half inch is probably probably just under a half inch is what I'm looking for in general, because the piece is so big. If you don't give it enough of a base to grab a hold of, it's just not going to be able to make it. It's just not going to be able to make it. It needs that support. So we get that opened, and now I'm focused on pulling back towards myself. So that's a spread. It's not the opening, that's just the spread. I'm literally widening out the bottom of this vessel because I want it to be the bottom of a vase here. I'm going to look for about 8.5 to 9.5 inches on the interior. And I'm taking my time here going back and forth because it is such a large disc. I mean, that's essentially the size of a small plate. That's about what we would consider a dinner plate, a 9-inch. You really need to focus on your compression. That's a big deal. So make sure that compression's in before you do your first pull. And this is my first pull. So it's important to note that first pull is different than the ending pulls. These pulls are requiring you to move masses in a different way. The inside is not like the outside, and that will be a great reference here to check out our cylinder video and ceramic theory video, where you do need to make sure that you're following those rules. But so here's our first pull. And this is more of a knuckle. This is called knuckling up. And what you need to do is make sure that your hands are closed, preferably around a source of water, like what I have with that sponge there. And that your fingers are tucked in, so they're nice and tight. And you're going to use the side or the front of your knuckle to make an indentation. And then you're going to pull that little roll, or that little indentation, upwards. And that's the whole point of pulling. Now, the trick with that is your hands have to match the wheel speed. You have to be able to make sure that you don't have too much pressure, just enough pressure. And right there you'll saw I lost a little bit of clay, and that was just a little bit of a lazy part on my fault. That really should have been slowed down. That all that came from it. I needed to slow down. I need to have a little bit more water. So as we head up, we're going to do more pulls, but I'm actually going to take time between pulls to reset everything. Alright, again, knuckling up, you'll notice that my right arm is down. That's my most solid arm for what's going to be outside here. It's going to help get that roll upwards. Alright, as we come up, we make sure that lateral pressure comes off just a little bit. Something that's important not to forget when you come up like that is to always make sure that your lateral pressure is almost zero by the time you hit to the top. But never stop. Never stop underneath the top, never stop at the top, okay? So let's get a better view. This is a reset here. Get a better view of what my right hand is doing. My left hand here has almost zero pressure. And it's just enough, quite literally, to hold just a tiny bit of pressure to stay sturdy. And you'll notice that I will lift my, I think what I'm doing right now is going back and compressing right there at the corner and the inside edge. But I'll lift my left thumb and it will come out in contact, and that's what you see right there. That right hand knuckling in again. My fingers are rolled into themselves with a sponge. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that monstrous chunk, that big mass of clay that's down at the bottom, and I'm quite literally forcing it into itself and pulling it back up. And that's where we get our height from, you know, and right here I kind of got my arm in the way there, but I'm trying to make sure that you understand. If you make this item, any item, come over the side of your bat, in this case I think I'm working on a 12-inch bat on a 13-inch head, and if you come over the side of it like that, like I did, that's why I stopped and trimmed it up, you can get in some real trouble there, and you can easily destroy the bottom of your pot. Make sure that you do not exceed your bat, okay? And now, I don't know if you noticed right there, I was again knuckled up, a really strong pressure from the right hand, and it straightened the outside wall up. And what I'm doing now is I'm coming back in with both hands. I'm trying to support that wall, but I'm also trying to pull it in just a little bit. I feel like at this point, looking back on this video, I know I felt like that the top was getting away from me a little bit there. And that's definitely something that can happen when you have these larger pieces. There's a lot of forces being shown at the top of your piece. It's not that they're being exerted heavier, it's just that they're being shown more. So keep that in mind. You cannot make this super thin at the top and have just this great big mass at the bottom. And you'll notice right there, if you'll back it up a little bit, you'll see that my hands actually skipped a part. They came over that bottom about 3 inches up, and that was intentional. That was intentional. What I was doing is I was trying to thin the mass above the problem area that I was having, because I was having just a little bit of problem as I was trying to bring that in. Yeah, I'm trying right now to correct it before it gets any further, and that's important. You need to make sure that if you make a mistake like that, and you can, from this angle, you can't really see what was going on, but if you make a mistake like that, you go ahead and correct it right then. Don't wait for another pull, because by the time you finish out another pull, you're going to have yourself in quite a bit of trouble. So again, this is an angle here. We're trying to see down. Watch the pressure. You can see that roll come in, and I'm lifting that roll all the way up. My left hand, you can see at right there about 3/4 of the way up, it starts to just fold inwards. And that is really important. I'm allowing this to be taller, not wider. That's important. Again, taller, not wider. It is critical for you to finish the thickness, however you want to say that, of your walls first before you start to shape them. And what I'm doing right now is I'm going back in and I'm giving myself just a little bit more clay to work with. Now that I have pulled that wall out a little bit, I can experiment just a teeny bit more, and I know I can push this a little bit further because I've widened that out just the slightest bit. So again, with my left thumb, if you'll notice that, make sure that if you can touch your hands, you are absolutely doing so. You need to reach over. You need to make sure that you've sturdied yourself. My right elbow is down. My left elbow is all the way up to the ceiling, so it's straight up and down. You don't want to have this weird chicken wing thing. That'll wind up getting your wrist caught against your vessel, and that's no good, and that's not going to work out well for you. Here we are. This is, I'm choking back in right here at the top. This is just basically a reset. You can do this between every pull if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm resetting the rim before I come into the refining pulls. Okay, so the refining pulls, this is your final bits of pull. This is where you want to make sure that you have absolutely gained as thin as you want or as thick as you want, depending on how you want to look at it. This is the point right before we actually shape our vessel. And we can start to pull to shape. That is actually a technique called pull to shape, but right now, let's just focus on getting our walls to the appropriate thickness. And for a vessel this size, the appropriate thickness would be closer to a 1/2 inch, probably not quite a full 1/2 inch. It's going to be between 1/4 and a 1/2 inch. You definitely don't want to do 1/4 on this size vessel unless you have some really stiff clay, and then you might be able to pull that off. But that's a lot of weight to be supporting from the top down. Okay. So again, right there, very slow. That was a great example of how to stay under your roll. Make sure that you stay under your roll when you're doing these pulls. Whatever finger you use on the outside must stay under. Let's give a good look right here. So my left hand gives some pressure. Oh, got to dry that out. My left hand is going to give some pressure down at the bottom, and we're going to look for this actual, it's almost like a tiny little bulge. I call it a roll. And whatever finger, or fingers in this case, like I have knuckled up, is underneath that, roll on the outside. Okay, let's say that again. Whatever finger you choose to use on the outside, just like this right here, watch that roll. That hand, fingers has to stay under that roll. Watch it come up. As we push this, if we come over that roll, then we've lost control of the vessel, we've lost control of the thickness and thinness, and we're not going to be able to effectively maneuver this the way we want it. We're not going to be able to shape it the way we want it. So you can see right there at the top, as soon as I was able to connect my hands, I did so. And if you remember, again, that right there, that left thumb comes right over top, and that connected to my right hand. As soon as you can touch that, you have to do so. That will help sturdy out, especially the top of the vessel, which is going to be your most loose end anyway, and it's usually what gets away from us. So let's just go down to the bottom again. I still have quite a bit of clay in the bottom, and what you see right there is my middle finger kind of rolling into the vessel, and that's from the bat into itself. Roll from the bat inwards. That will pick up another roll, and check this out. We're going to take this thing all the way to the top. Again, take your time. If you get in trouble here, by that I mean if you get to the point where you're either out of water, or you need to breathe, or you need to carry on a conversation, or somebody's asking you a quote, whatever it is, you need to take your hands off. And some of you are probably referencing right now, Kip said if I needed to breathe, well, I breathe a lot. I breathe a lot too. Everybody does. It's very important. I don't want you to hold your breath, but a lot of folks reference that if they stop moving their upper body, they start doing better. And that's not necessarily what we want you to do. Moving your upper body, of course, is bad. Slowing it down or not moving it is great, but holding your breath is terrible. However, there's nothing wrong with paying attention to one of your breaths. Just breathe out as you lift up. If you run out of air halfway, that's okay. Take your hands off, catch your breath, put them back where you were. If you're constantly breathing, your walls are going to be constantly having issues. Usually it comes in the form of a torque, because you'll have a thin spot on top of a thick spot, and then a thick spot on top of that. And what happens is you have this thin between the two thick spots, and it will fall in on itself very, very quickly. And it's usually quite frustrating because more often than not, we don't know exactly what just happened. And again, that's no fun. So I'm not saying don't breathe. I'm just saying pay attention to one breath. Right down at the bottom, as soon as you make that roll, take a deep breath. And as you lift up, breathe out. Now if you get halfway up, like right here, stop, take them off. Continue where you were if you have to do that. Don't put your hands back at the bottom and grab another roll thinking that you can just run the two into each other. That is a serious mistake, and that will come back to bite you. So no good on that, okay? Here, I think we're finishing out the last bits. Now, there is nothing wrong with doing what we could say is a pull. It's not really a pull. It's more of an evening process. And by that, I mean it really is using more of the side of the inside. My hand on the inside hand, my left hand, I'm going to be using the side of either my index finger or my middle finger like a blade. And we're going to smooth that out as we come up. It looks like a pull, but I'm not really trying to force the clay upwards. I'm just trying to smooth it out. The longer you take with this process, the more the vessel is going to really come around and set yourself up for success, depending on what you're getting ready to do. Remember, do not stop at the top. You have got to come all the way through the top. If you do so, you'll wind up with what looks like this great big thick mass or this great big thick rim. And sometimes that is okay. That is, I can't just sit here and say that, thick rims are bad. Thick rims are good. Sometimes that's okay. that is a whole nother set of videos we have. I use a thick rim on my pots, but my rim is not solid. My rim actually encapsulates a large coil of air, and that is, again, neither here nor there. We have plenty to watch. You can check those videos out. Introduction of air in the kiln versus your form and function. Again, it is not a curse or a death sentence to have air in the kiln. You just have to be very careful. For me in particular, I do that with the rims. So here we are again, though. It's a pretty good angle from my left hand. It's bouncing a little bit there. That means it got a little dry, so I'm going to need to smooth that out a little. There you go. So my right hand comes in to save the day with that sponge. If you'll notice, though, when I put my left hand in there, I was using the largest part of my left index finger all the way down to the knuckle of my finger. Okay, so here we are back again. This is going to be more a bowl type vessel, so I was shooting for a curved interior. That's the difference in what I consider my studio. Bowls have curved interiors, cylinders have flat bottoms. That's pretty much it for that explanation here at the studio. There are, of course, outliers and many ways to say that's not true. There could be any number of other things to do, and or say flat bottom bowls. Well, that's just a good example in itself. But for here, we're just shooting for a curvature. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Take your sponge, move from the center to the right, and from the right to the center. I'm actually pulling almost towards myself right now. It is really important that you never cross that center unless you are moving the wheel in a left-handed manner, or you are, of course, as people say, ambidextrous. You can flip that switch back and forth on your wheel if you have that option, but you have to wait for the wheel to catch up to your mind. Ambidextrous people are cursed on this a lot because they flip back and forth faster than the wheel can handle it. If you're right-handed and you cross over that line right dead in the center, it will probably tear your pots or cause something that will otherwise be a deformation, and it occurs so quickly that it is otherwise usually, again, kind of a death sentence for us. So important, do not cross that line. All right, from here, your pulls are done. Your shaping is roughed out as best you can with your hands. This is the part where we would introduce a little bit of a rib. Now, there are 1,000 ribs in the world, probably even at the local store. You could, I'm sure, get more than that. But each rib being unique, one thing that seems to be a commonality between them is that you need to slow down to do rib work or shaping work. And I don't know if you could tell, but I touched the pedal with my toe there to slow us down. You don't have to be ridiculously slow. You do need, however, to make sure that you're slow enough that if you have this great big chunky rib come into your system, you don't just break it or have things fall all to pieces. All right, well, we're going to pull that back to the taller video there, or taller piece there, to finish things out for you on this video. And what I'm doing here, it was just like in the other video, or excuse me, the other piece that you just saw. We were finalizing the top, finalizing the shape of the side. Now, this particular vessel was not the bowl that you saw in the last clip. This was a two-part vase structure. And we had, again, two-part meaning we made the top and bottom separately. And I joined them later in a little session that we will cover. Two-part vessels. This is me moving down at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it as well. There you can. There's a tiny little bit of a warble in what looks like about halfway up this vessel. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my hands down here and I'm just holding my hands right on top of that. That's all you have to do. When you get something that starts to shake like that, find that shake, hold your hands on top of it, and then you can chase it up to the top just like that right there. And we're trying to move that wobble up into the top so that if it's necessary, we can cut it down. I think that about covers everything for us as far as centering and pulling. We appreciate you watching, and if you don't mind, check out those links below, subscribe, and of course, click the notification. Thanks for watching.